After the headlines about President Maduro's alleged abduction, the next international story that started dominating attention was Greenland. Once again, global media zeroed in on statements and signals coming out of Washington about the island. The mood across Europe tightened immediately, because Europe is the region that would feel the shockwave first if this issue escalated. People laughed it off as another outrageous idea from a controversial president. Denmark pushed back hard, and Greenland's own leaders called the talk insulting. But treating it like a one-man spectacle misses the real pattern. This isn't new, and it isn't personal. The United States has circled Greenland repeatedly for nearly 160 years. In 1867, right after buying Alaska, U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward explored the idea of acquiring Greenland as well. In 1910, the U.S. weighed variants of the same concept again under President William Howard Taft. In 1946, Harry Truman reportedly offered $100 million in gold for Greenland. In 2019, Trump revived the idea publicly. And in 2025, the proposal returned with a more forceful tone, plus a dedicated envoy assigned to the mission. 5 presidents, multiple political eras, different parties, yet the same destination. That's not a personality quirk. That's a structural pull. This is where geopolitical thinking matters. Tim Marshall's core argument in Prisoners of Geography is simple. Leaders make choices, but geography sets the boundaries. Mountains, seas, distances, and choke points are invisible walls that shape strategy, whether politicians like it or not. Technology changes how fast you move, but it doesn't move the island. Now look at the map. Greenland sits between North America and Europe, and it hangs over the shortest Arctic routes linking Russia and the United States. Draw a straight line from Moscow to New York, and you're going through the Arctic and brushing Greenland. In military terms, that corridor matters for the logic of ballistic trajectories and for the ocean space's strategic submarines transit. That's why Greenland is often described as a choke point. Control the bottleneck, control the flow, like holding the only bridge across a wide river. And it's not just about Greenland by itself. It's part of a larger strategic structure known as the GIUK Gap: Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, a maritime corridor connecting the North Atlantic to the Arctic. For decades, this corridor has been treated as one of the key gates through which Russian submarines might enter Western waters. During the Cold War, the US and its allies built surveillance networks, bases, and patrol patterns around this corridor for a reason. It's a gateway you don't ignore. So the real question isn't, why is the US talking about Greenland again? The real question is, why does geography keep dragging major powers back to Greenland, again and again, regardless of who's in office? And as the Arctic becomes more valuable, what exactly are the great powers trying to secure on this board? The United States looks almost unfairly well-positioned. 2 massive coastlines give it instant reach into global markets, and 2 oceans act like buffers that most countries can only dream of. But the American map has always had one anxiety point: the top. For centuries, the Arctic wasn't a front door at all. It was a dead zone, ice-choked, hostile, and effectively unusable. Ships couldn't cut through it. Aircraft had nowhere to safely stage or land. In strategic terms, the North was less a border and more a frozen void, an accidental fortress. That fortress is disappearing. The Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet. Sea ice is thinning and withdrawing, and routes that were once fantasy lines on a map are becoming workable passages. When those lanes open, the unreachable North stops being a shield and starts becoming an approach vector. And that's where Greenland turns into more than just an island. It becomes a lock on a door, the piece you either control or you spend the rest of your time worrying about who does. The same idea keeps returning because the map doesn't change. In 1867, right after the Alaska Purchase, most Americans treated the deal like a joke. Newspapers mocked it as a frozen wasteland, an expensive slab of ice where nothing of value could possibly exist. But William H. Seward wasn't buying scenery. He was buying position. He understood something basic and brutal. Alaska sits on the western edge of the Arctic world, and Greenland sits on the eastern edge. Together, they form a kind of northern frame, two massive landmasses that can shape who moves through the Arctic and who gets warned first. In Seward's logic, holding only Alaska was incomplete. It's like building a wall and leaving the roof open. So he started quietly exploring whether Greenland could be acquired from Denmark as well. The attempt went nowhere. Congress was already exhausted by Seward's appetite for deals, and politically, there wasn't enough patience to entertain another giant purchase. But the idea didn't vanish. It just waited. 1946, when the North became a 30-minute countdown. Fast forward almost 80 years. The world had just survived World War II, and the rules of warfare were rewriting themselves. Truman, more than anyone, understood what nuclear weapons meant. He had authorized their use. Then the strategic planners did something simple. They put a map on the table and drew the most important line of the new era, Moscow to New York. The line didn't sweep across Europe or follow the Atlantic like people assume. It cut over the polar region and ran straight past Greenland. That's the moment Greenland stops being a distant place and becomes a problem you can measure in minutes. A long-range strike coming over the Arctic compresses decision time into a brutal window. Around 30 minutes. Not enough to calmly verify, not enough to relocate leadership, not enough to move critical assets. And without early warning systems positioned forward in the Arctic, the first notice of an incoming attack could arrive when it's already too late to matter. Truman also had another memory the public rarely frames this way. During the war, Denmark was occupied by Germany, and the US had to move into Greenland to prevent it from becoming a platform for enemy operations. The lesson was simple and permanent. If Greenland is controlled by a hostile power, North America becomes easier to threaten. So Truman tried to solve it the cleanest way possible: buy it. He offered Denmark $100 million in gold, a staggering proposal for the time. Denmark refused the sale, but the compromise still revealed the strategic truth. The US was granted the ability to build and operate key installations, including Thule Air Base, which became one of the most critical Arctic outposts of the Cold War defense architecture. And that's the pattern. The personalities change, the headlines change, the century changes, yet the same strategic gravity keeps pulling the same great power back to the same island. Truman's fear didn't fade with time. It evolved into something worse. The Soviet Union didn't stop at intercontinental missiles. It built nuclear submarines, steel predators that could slip under Arctic ice, crawl into the North Atlantic, and position themselves close enough to make warning time collapse from half an hour into mere minutes. Picture the nightmare scenario strategists obsessed over: a Russian ballistic missile submarine lurking east of Greenland. From that zone, the distance to the US Northeast is short enough that a launch could put targets like Boston in the crosshairs with almost no meaningful reaction window. Not 30 minutes. Not even 20. More like 10 to 12 minutes, the kind of time span where you don't respond, you just absorb impact. That is why the Cold War didn't treat Greenland as a remote ice sheet. It treated it as the final shield. So the US and its allies built a detection cage around the North Atlantic choke corridor, the GIUK Gap. Not just ships and patrol aircraft, but underwater listening systems, the sonar networks designed to catch what radar couldn't. Radar is for skies. Sonar is for the ocean, and the ocean was where the deadliest approach vector lived. This is also why installations like Thule became far more than a base. They were early warning infrastructure. Every extra minute gained was priceless. The difference between having some ability to react and having none at all. By this point, Greenland wasn't geography. It was insurance. And then, from 2019 onward, Donald Trump walked onto the stage carrying the same old equation, but inside a new, harsher world. When Trump floated the idea of acquiring Greenland in 2019, people laughed. Media framed it like a stunt. Denmark called it absurd. It became a punchline. But if you zoom out across history, it doesn't read like madness. It reads like continuity, the latest expression of a strategic logic that has been resurfacing for well over a century. What changed by 2025 was urgency. The Arctic isn't frozen the way it used to be. Ice retreat isn't theoretical anymore, it's reshaping routes and access. That means new sea lanes, new operating space, and new places for military power to move, hide, and project. At the same time, Russia has been rebuilding its Arctic posture, reopening old Soviet-era sites, upgrading infrastructure, and showcasing new generations of weapons designed for speed and penetration. China, meanwhile, has pushed into the Arctic conversation by branding itself a near-Arctic state and investing heavily across northern projects, not because it's nearby, but because it understands how power gets positioned before it's needed. And against that backdrop, America's weaknesses become visible: limited ice-breaking capacity, stretched logistics, and a northern domain that suddenly demands more attention than the US is structurally prepared to give it. So Trump looked at the map and saw what Seward saw in 1867 and what Truman saw in 1946. Greenland isn't a trophy. It's leverage. This time, the posture wasn't just talk. It came with escalation, appointing a dedicated envoy, leaning into absolute necessity language, and framing the entire issue as security critical rather than symbolic. Tariffs and pressure tactics entered the discussion, not as random aggression, but as tools meant to force movement on a problem Washington considers strategic. 5 presidents, nearly 160 years, the same recurring conclusion. That's not a coincidence. It's gravity. The geopolitical board wasn't thrown together. It's being played with calculation. And right now, 3 doors are swinging open at the same time. If Greenland has always mattered, why is the pressure spiked now? Because 3 major shifts are converging into a rare alignment, and Greenland sits at the center of that convergence. Shift 1. The ice is retreating, and the Arctic is becoming usable. What used to be permanent ice is turning into navigable water. That single change triggers 2 revolutions. First, new shipping routes. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast can cut a massive chunk of travel time between Asia and Europe compared to the traditional Suez Path, and a future transpolar route could be even shorter. Second, resources are becoming accessible. As the ice pulls back, the Arctic exposes energy and minerals that were previously locked behind geography. The region is widely estimated to hold a large share of the world's undiscovered oil and gas, along with enormous deposits of critical minerals, including rare earths. In other words, the Arctic isn't just melting, it's turning into a marketplace. Shift 2. China enters the Arctic game, not because it's close, but because it's trapped. In 2018, Beijing branded itself a near-Arctic state and announced the concept of a polar Silk Road as an extension of Belt and Road, a clear statement of intent. China has no Arctic territory and sits thousands of kilometers away, but it understands a brutal strategic reality. The routes that keep China's economy alive can also become choke points that suffocate it. One of the biggest is the Strait of Malacca, narrow, heavily monitored, and vulnerable to pressure. A large share of China's imported energy flows through that corridor. In a crisis, dependence becomes a weakness. So China looks north and sees an escape route, a second set of arteries that reduces reliance on the southern bottlenecks. That's why it invests in Arctic infrastructure, scientific presence, and resource projects, including mining interests and research activity connected to Greenland. Shift 3. Russia fortifies the Arctic as a core military theater. Moscow owns the longest Arctic coastline on the planet, and it's been pouring money into turning the region into a hardened zone. It has revived old Soviet-era sites, expanded air and coastal defenses, and built the world's most formidable icebreaker fleet. And after 2022, no one can pretend Russia is unwilling to use force to defend what it defines as vital interest. In the Kremlin's view, the Arctic is not optional. It's strategic depth, energy security, and military advantage rolled into one. These trends don't run separately, they amplify each other. Ice retreat increases the Arctic's value. Rising value attracts China and Russia. Their presence forces the US to react. And Greenland sits in the middle like a pressure point. So the question becomes, what exactly is so valuable that no major power can ignore it? The interests that make Greenland non-negotiable. 1. Military security, early warning, and Arctic dominance. Greenland hosts a critical U.S. installation tied to missile warning and space surveillance, a position with geometry that can't be replicated somewhere nearby. If the United States loses reliable access and influence over that location, it risks losing precious minutes in the earliest phase of a ballistic threat coming over the polar corridor. In this domain, minutes are not comfort. Minutes are survival. And geography is ruthless. You can build more radar, but you cannot build a new Greenland. 2. Minerals and supply chains, the raw material layer of future power. Greenland holds a concentration of critical minerals that modern economies depend on: lithium for batteries, materials used in semiconductors, and rare earth elements that sit inside everything from phones to precision weapons. Right now, China dominates much of the global rare earth supply chain. Greenland represents a possible breaker of that monopoly, a way for the West to diversify the inputs that feed its tech and defense industries. Control the upstream minerals, and you influence the downstream future. 3. Trade routes, the toll gates of the 21st century. Greenland sits in a strategic position relative to all three major Arctic shipping pathways: the Northwest Passage through Canada, the Northern Sea route along Russia, and the future transpolar route across the top of the world. As those lanes become more viable, Greenland becomes what ports and straits have always been in world history: a logistics hub, a refueling point, a monitoring platform, and potentially a checkpoint. Think of what Singapore represents for Malacca: leverage. Greenland has the potential to become that kind of leverage for the Arctic century. Greenland sits right on the shortest emerging Eurasia-Asia trade geometry. So the real question isn't whether it's valuable, it's whether the United States can actually secure control over it, and by what path. There are a handful of plausible futures, and each comes with its own payoff curve, legal constraints, and political blast radius. Scenario 1. A clean purchase, negotiated acquisition. This is the most straightforward method on paper. Washington offers a massive financial package and tries to convince Denmark and Greenland to sign. The upside is obvious. It's clean under international law. It avoids detonating relations with Europe. And America can point to historical precedent, Louisiana, Alaska, as proof that purchases can reshape strategy peacefully. The problem is that history already ran this experiment. Denmark has refused multiple times, and Greenland's public position has repeatedly been not for sale. Selling a homeland from one flag to another is politically radioactive, especially for a population with strong national identity and growing self-rule ambitions. So, in the short term, this path has the lowest probability. Not impossible, but unlikely without a dramatic shock that changes domestic incentives inside Greenland itself. Scenario 2. Independence first, then alignment, the associated state route. This is slower, but strategically elegant. The U.S. backs Greenland's gradual move towards sovereignty, waits for separation from Denmark, then builds a special relationship similar to an associated state model, the kind of arrangement Washington has with places like Palau or the Marshall Islands. Why it works? It doesn't look like a colonial purchase. It leans on self-determination, the most defensible moral/legal frame available. And it can produce a durable partnership built on shared interests rather than formal ownership. But there's a hard constraint: money. Greenland currently relies heavily on Danish support, hundreds of millions annually, and it doesn't yet have the fiscal base to stand alone. If Greenland goes independent, someone has to underwrite the transition, and that someone would almost certainly be the United States. That means long-term subsidy commitments, infrastructure spending, and political accountability, which is not an easy sell to the U.S. Congress. So the odds here are medium, but mostly in the long run. It's arguably the most feasible strategic path, but it requires patience, and American politics is famously impatient. Scenario 3. Economic and political coercion. Pressure Denmark until it bends. This is the high-speed approach. Tariffs, sanctions, diplomatic threats, and public pressure campaigns meant to force concessions. The advantage is tempo. It shows resolve, creates urgency, and can produce movement quickly. But the downside is explosive. Denmark is a NATO ally. Bullying an ally undermines the very alliance structure the US needs when dealing with Russia and China. In the worst case, coercion fractures trust across Europe and turns Greenland into a symbol of American overreach. That's the paradox. This tactic can backfire so hard that Washington ends up losing both Greenland access and European cohesion. So the success probability is low, with high downside risk. Scenario 4. Don't own Greenland. Just deepen the footprint. This is the most practical and least dramatic route. Stop chasing formal possession and instead expand what already exists. That means scaling defense agreements, investing in infrastructure and logistics, building deeper ties with Greenland's government, maintaining cooperation with Denmark. The upside: legally clean,
Alliance-friendly.
and it can achieve most US security objectives without sparking a sovereignty crisis. The weakness: you don't truly control the mineral future. And if Greenland eventually becomes independent and chooses a different alignment, US access could become negotiable, including access tied to its military installations. So this scenario is the easiest to execute and the most likely to succeed operationally, but it doesn't permanently solve the long-term control problem. The system view: Greenland is approaching a phase change. If you step back and look at Greenland through systems thinking, it starts to resemble a configuration nearing a phase transition, a tipping point where the system flips into a new stable state and doesn't easily return. In complexity science, phase transitions are abrupt and irreversible shifts. Ice becomes water at 0 degrees Celsius. Magnets lose magnetism past a critical temperature. The form changes, and the old rules stop applying. Greenland feels like it's approaching that kind of threshold because multiple forces are accumulating at once, especially the internal push toward independence. The self-determination movement is strengthening, and a growing portion of Greenland's population wants more control over its future. And when internal pressure builds while external demand rises, systems don't stay calm. They jump. As the world shifts toward green energy, Greenland's resources don't just matter more. They become strategically explosive. At the same time, national identity hardens. Pride rises. The desire to choose one's own future becomes less negotiable. That's the push. The brakes are just as real. Financial dependence on Denmark, limited administrative capacity, no credible independent defense posture, and a deep fear of trading one umbrella for another, slipping from Danish sovereignty into the shadow of a different great power. In systems terms, you get a simple rule. When the push force surpasses the holding force, the system flips. Greenland stops functioning as a Danish appendage and becomes something new. The only question is, new aligned with whom? Everyone is trapped in a bad set of choices. Denmark is boxed in. Keeping Greenland is expensive and gets harder as the independence movement grows. Letting it go means losing territory and geopolitical weight. Selling it to the United States would look like betraying Greenlanders and throwing away centuries of national legacy. Denmark can't win cleanly. It can only choose which kind of loss it prefers. Greenland wants independence, but independence isn't a slogan. It's a balance sheet. A fishing-based economy can't easily finance a modern state. Mining might change that, but mining requires capital, technology, and foreign partners. That creates the core dilemma. Independence without sponsorship risks economic fragility. Sponsorship from a superpower risks turning independence into a new kind of dependence, autonomy in name, alignment in reality. The United States needs Greenland, but its current posture is self-defeating. Threatening language alienates both Denmark and Greenlanders. Limited Arctic capability weakens America's ability to compete directly with Russia in that domain. And applying pressure to a NATO ally at the exact moment Europe is nervous about Russia is a strategic contradiction. It trades long-term alliance cohesion for short-term leverage, often the worst bargain in geopolitics. China wants Arctic access, but it lacks the one thing that matters most: a territorial platform. It tries to buy influence through investment, research, and commercial projects, yet many of those moves collide with US pressure. And even if China wants to use Arctic sea lanes, the Northern Sea Route ties it to Russia, meaning it escapes one choke point dependence only to accept another dependence, just with a different gatekeeper. Russia holds the strongest geographic position, the longest Arctic coastline, but geography doesn't pay the bills. Sanctions and war costs strip resources. Russia wants to develop Arctic shipping and infrastructure, but that requires foreign capital and technology. That pushes Moscow toward Chinese money while fearing Chinese dominance. Ukraine consumes bandwidth that could have gone north. Russia's advantage is space. Its weakness is capacity. So you end up with a board where every major player is incomplete. No one has everything they need. And paradoxically, that imperfection creates room for outcomes that don't follow any single power's script. This is where emergence happens. Systems thinking has a concept for what comes next. Emergence, when interactions between actors generate a new entity with behavior no single actor controls. A single ant is not intelligent. A colony can solve complex problems. Greenland is entering that kind of moment. It is no longer simply Danish territory, or an American objective, or a Chinese opportunity. It's becoming a political actor with its own voice, its own priorities, and its own bargaining power. And here's the uncomfortable truth for every superpower watching the Arctic. Greenland has only about 56,000 people, but those 56,000 are holding the steering wheel for one of the most important pieces on the 21st century chessboard. The great powers still talk about Greenland like a chess piece, but the piece is learning how to move on its own.